Welcome to Scotty Kilmer Live Car Talk Podcast, where I use my 51 years of fixing cars and answer all your car questions. I'm sponsored by no one except the truth. You got a question, I'll give you the best answer I can give you. Just remember, during the show, ask your questions in the live chat. I pick the best ones, then I answer them. First question is Jeremiah Nolan. He says, Scotty, I have an '01 Dodge Ram 1500 5.9 liter and a tranny went out. The engine run great. Should I get a junkyard transmission for $550? Thanks. Well, you got to put your thinking cap on for this one. Those have horrible transmissions, but it's 18 years old. If you buy an 18-year-old junkyard transmission, that's one of the few things that's going to fit. The new ones won't fit that old vehicle. You're taking a real gamble. I mean, $550 isn't all that much money, but then you got to put it on, do all that work. And if it doesn't work, you're back to square one. Most guys, if they like the vehicle, they'll get a factory manufactured one, put it in, and then it can run for quite some time. They do a decent job at the factory remanufactured ones. But just buying one from a junkyard, now let's say it was a Toyota, I'd say sure, because the Toyota transmissions hardly ever break. So if you buy a used one in a junkyard, odds are it's going to still be pretty good. But the Chryslers, they break all the time. And if you buy a used transmission, you're really taking quite a bit of gamble right there. I personally wouldn't do it. Next question. F-Quiz says, hey, what brand new two-door car would you recommend or any regular sedan out there in the market? Okay, you want a two-door car? Get a Toyota Corolla. Those things can run forever. They make them with various doors, of course, but you can still get a two-door. Or a Honda Civic. If you like standard transmissions, the Honda Civic would be a better choice because they're really zippy little cars. But their automatic transmissions are a little iffy, so if you're talking about a two-door automatic transmission car, I'd say get a Toyota Corolla. That would be the best thing that you could get for money that's going to last a long time, not have any problems, and still not cost all that much money. If you like a Camry, yeah, they're even better, but they cost a lot more money than the Corollas do. Next question. Some guy says, Scotty, what do you think about older Suzuki cars like the Baleno sedan, 97? I heard Suzuki make great engines, but the rest of the car is weaker. Yeah, that is true. Realize Suzuki is originally a motorcycle company. Actually, before that, they made looms to make fabric and stuff, but they ended up making motorcycles. And they make great motorcycles, killers. I had a Suzuki 750. That thing was bulletproof. Go 170 miles an hour. I mean, no problems at all. And their car engines, they're decent. But the rest of the vehicles are kind of They pulled out of the United States decades ago because they had so many problems with people not being able to fix them and with them breaking down and with them being, their motorcycle engines, of course, are small, put out a lot of horsepower for two wheels. But for four wheels, they were underpowered vehicles. But I mean, if you like the Baleno sedan 97, you can get one cheap enough. If you're somewhere else in the world besides the United States, go right ahead. It's just that here, you can't get parts for Suzuki cars. It's a pain in the butt. So I would not advise anybody to buy a Suzuki car in the United States because they're just so hard to get parts for. Next question is Daniel Hernandez. Scotty, I got a Dodge Charger 2006. The car overheated and it had the thermostat, water pump, hoses, and head gasket replaced. It needs a new fuel pump and other things. Should I keep it or should I sell it? Okay, here's the thing. It's a 13-year-old Charger. Generally, guys beat the heck out of them. But what you want to do is, I've got a video called How to Tell If Your Head Gasket's Blown. Watch that. You can get the head gasket testing kit from Amazon for like $30. See if the head gasket's blown. If the head gasket isn't blown and it runs good, go ahead and fix it up. But if the head gasket's starting to go from it overheating, I'd get rid of it. I wouldn't put any more money into it. Because they're fun to drive. They're fast cars. But as they age, they tend to be money pits. Chrysler products aren't made to last a really long time. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the last decent Chrysler products were stuff they made in the 1960s. They were pretty good then, but not lately. Next question. Thomas Rossi says, what are your thoughts on stable? I'm wondering whether to put the stable gas treatment into my vehicles if I'm storing them. Okay. It does work. The modern gasoline isn't made to last all that long. So if you got something that's sitting for 6 months or more, it's a good idea to read the directions on the stable can, put that in to keep it from deteriorating while it's sitting there. But that said, I've read the stable instructions, and normally they're telling you that it's only good for maybe a year and a half. So if you're storing it for a real long period of time, you're better to empty the whole fuel system out and leaving nothing in it than you are leaving fuel in it expecting it to be good, because modern gasoline is a lot weaker than it was when I was a young mechanic in the 60s. Back then, you could have a motorcycle, let it sit for 3 or 4 years with the gas in the tank, and then just crank it up and start right up, driving around a little, and then fill it up with new gas, and it'd be okay. Modern gasoline isn't that stable. It won't last that long, and even with the stabilizer stuck in it, it's still not going to be all that long life. And they even warn you on the directions if you read the directions of it. Next question. Now he says, a 2002 Audi A4 1.8 turbo with 140,000 and a standard transmission. Think it's worth $1,000 for a project rally rig. It runs and drives. Yeah, you know what I mean? Hey, if you get a rally car for $1,000, realize those are endless money pit cars. It's just the way that they are. But if it runs and goes down the road and you want to make a cute little rally car out of the thing and use it on weekends, go ahead. You're only throwing $1,000 out. If something big goes wrong, junk it. It's not that much of a loss for a rally car. But don't put a whole bunch of money in it. Don't think, ooh, I'm going to soup it up. I'm going to upgrade the suspension. I'm going to do this and that. Do not put a ton of money into it, because the thing is basically worthless. Nobody wants to give any money for those cars anyways. But at least it's got a standard transmission now, so you don't have to deal with all the garbage of the Volkswagen, and Volkswagen owns Audi and Porsche, horrible automatic transmission disease that they all generally get as they age. So, heck, for $1,000, if it runs good now, that could be a fun toy for rallying around in. Next question. Noah MRV says, I just bought a manual transmission, front-wheel drive, 2009 Volvo V50 TR5R design. The i5 turbo, 235 horsepower and torque. For 7,500 Canadian with 145,000 kilometers. What are your thoughts? Nothing's wrong with the car. Okay. Well, I got to do a little calculation, because that's like what? Yeah, 70-something thousand miles, which isn't much. And 7,500 Canadian, which is probably like what, $5,000 US or something like that. That's a decent deal. With the standard transmission are pretty good on Swedish cars. Their automatics on those, they're pretty much garbage, and as they age, all of my customers with those things, the trannies always went out and cost them a fortune. A few of them would spend $4 or $5,000 and fix them, and most of them just junk the cars. But you got a standard transmission Volvo, and they're a lot stronger. So, hey, take care of it and drive it. Who knows? Some fool paid a lot more money than that when it was brand new, and you got it at that price with that low mileage. Hey, baby, it could be a fun car to drive around in. And the Volvos are really good in the snow. It snows in Canada, so could be a good deal. Mona says, what is the best car you've ever owned? Best regards, BMW addict, Swedish girl. Okay, personally, the best car that I ever owned, I still own. It's a 94 Toyota Celica. It's got 240,000 miles on it. It still runs like a clock. The air conditioning still blows cold. And other than that, it was an 81 Toyota Corolla SR5 that I had that was a nice hatchback, had a 5-speed standard transmission, a 1.8 bulletproof pushrod engine. I mean, the things can run forever. They're not speed demons by any stretch of the imagination, but in terms of the best car and how long it would run and still not give you too many problems, I'd have to say it was the Celica by far. You know, first car I ever owned was an Opel. I started to dream about it last night that I got it back and it was all fixed up. I guess my mind is thinking strange things, who knows. But that was nothing compared to the Toyotas. I mean, absolutely nothing. Next question. Alex Christie says, Scotty, if I put 0W20 in my Lexus and they recommend 5W30, it possibly can damage the engine. The VVT is rattling a cold startup, and I'm thinking it'll do better for the phaser. Okay, here's the thing. Try it for a week. If it does stop the rattling, great. That little difference isn't going to make all that much. It's a lot lighter. But if it still makes the noise, take it out and put the 530 back in, because it was made for the 530. And those cam phasers, man, they're expensive to replace. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. So give it a try. And if the noise goes away, drive it around, see what happens. But if it doesn't at all, give it a week or two. Go back to the other oil, because if it's not helping it, go back to the heavier oil, which is going to lubricate your engine better and give you more protection, especially on cold startups. Next question. Miso Ramirez says, what are your thoughts on an 05 Scion TC for $3,000 with 150,000 miles? Okay, those are good vehicles. Now, they don't make them anymore, but they really do. I don't know what Toyota had in their mind. They decided to call their cars Scions and sell them to youngsters, the millennials, and even younger people. And around us, they would go to events and they'd give free road tests with good-looking 20-year-olds giving the road test, either male or female, depending on who they were going for. And then after a while, I guess they decided it cost them too much money to have separate Scion dealers, even though they were really Toyotas, you know. And now they're selling them as Toyotas. But they're well-made vehicles. There's nothing wrong with them. You can get it, and it still runs good with that kind of mileage. I mean, I've seen them with 300,000-400,000 miles on them. You know, and they're nice-looking cars. There's nothing wrong with it. Normally, I tell people don't buy a car that they don't make anymore, but really, they still make them. They're just going back to calling them Toyotas again. I don't know. They got a weird set in their mind. I can understand them making Lexuses separate from Toyotas, because back when they started doing that, most people weren't going to spend $40,000 back then for a Toyota, but they would for a luxury Lexus, even though it's the same company. Well, that was the opposite. They thought, well, the cool hipsters, they want a Scion. They don't want a Toyota like Mom has a Toyota Camry. They want a Scion, but that kind of failed, so now they call them all Toyotas. Next question. Wasim Giada says, Scotty, can I install traction control for my 2003 GMC Envoy that doesn't have it? Well, of course you can do whatever you want, but it's going to cost you a fortune, because you're going to have to install all the sensors, the wiring, the computer software. I mean, that's expensive stuff. It just really is. And the money you'd spend for an older vehicle, you know, a 16-year-old vehicle, I don't think it's really worth it. Truthfully, the GM traction control doesn't work that well anyways. I rented one a few years back. We went to Lake Tahoe, and we were riding around all this frozen wasteland, and Lake Tahoe doesn't freeze, but some of the lakes around there do. So I got in it, and I started doing donuts on the ice, and the traction control is supposed to keep it from slipping and sliding. It still slipped and slid like that on ice, so it doesn't impress me. I wouldn't spend the money trying to do something like that myself, because it really doesn't work all that well. Next question. Ruben Shakir says, is paying $90,000 for a great condition 69 Dodge Charger worth it? Okay, you're getting into the stratosphere there. Now, if you want to get a 69 Charger and pay that kind of money, you want a guy like me to check it out first, because it's got to be all original. Got to have all matching part numbers. Can't have any frame damage. It would still have to have the original paint job on it and look good too. Because when you're paying that kind of inflated money, it has to be a unique car, entirely unique. I've got a friend that's got a 57 Chevy Bel Air, and it's worth a fortune because it's still got the plastic cover for the rear seats. Now, the paint's original. Some of it's a little off, but it's still original. The chrome on the windows that go up and down on the top, it's still there. And it's got a little bit of corrosion on it, but it's original. And for that kind of money, you got to have everything original. If the engine's been changed, the transmission's been changed, it's not worth that because it's not original anymore. Now, some guys, if they swap them out and they keep all the original parts, like the original engine and the tranny, then you can think about it because you still got all the original stuff that can be put back in it if somebody wants to do that. But if you don't have all the original parts, it's not worth that kind of money. Next question. Zoltan Ungvari says, Scotty, what do you think about switching to thicker oil for older engines, high mileage? Okay. That's okay on older engines. When I was a younger mechanic, we did it all the time. Let's say somebody had an old Chevy 350 V8 that was burning a quart of oil every, 400 miles. If you put a thicker oil, it would burn less oil. Those were simple engines. They were V8s. They had push rods. They didn't have overhead cams. It's all right to do that. You can't do it with the real modern ones that have variable valve timing and phasers, cam phasers, and all that stuff. Because you got to have the thinner oil for all that stuff to work or it won't even work right. And you can wear the engines out prematurely by putting a really thick oil. But for the old engines, we are always doing that. And if you're talking about antiques, like the ones that aren't even overhead valves, that had the valves in the block, yeah, everybody always puts thicker oil in those things. Next question. Capo DYHC 28 says, Scotty, I got an 03 Malibu with a loud growling noise in the front end. Is that a bearing sound? Well, you got to figure out if it is. And here's a pretty easy way of telling most of the time. You're driving down the road, say going 40 or 50, do it early Sunday morning or something when there's nobody on the road, and you hear the noise. And gradually veer to the left. And if you gradually veer to the left and the noise gets slightly louder, it's the left front wheel bearing because you're loading it then. Now let's say it kind of gets less. But then when you steer to the right, the growling noise gets louder, then it's the right front bearing that's going out. And if it's in the back, you get a little bit of that same thing. But for that, you really need 3 other people in your car. Roll all the windows down. They can all stick their heads out. If somebody says it's loudest in the left rear, you know it's the left rear. Usually it is bearings that are growling, but by turning it, going at higher speed, you can really tell. Because let's say it's a bearing going out on your water pump or your alternator. Turning it won't affect the noise, but turning it will affect the noise when it's a wheel bearing because then it loads the wheel more to the side you're turning to and it'll make more noise. Anthony T says, Scotty, huge fan. So me and my wife have a 2016 Volkswagen Beetle. Thinking about adding some lowering springs. What's your opinion? Well, I'm not a fan of the later model Beetles. They had all kinds of problems, and they don't make them anymore. They stopped making them. If you want to do whatever you want to do, hey, play around with it. What the heck? That's what I say on that. It's virtually worthless car. They don't make it anymore. So if you try selling it, you're not going to get anything for it. So if you want to play around with it and lower it, go ahead and do whatever you want. If you want it as a toy, keep it as a toy and do whatever you want because it's not like the car's ever going to be worth any money because they stopped making them. When they stopped making them, the values of the car go down. It was a mass-produced car. It wasn't like a car that they only made 800 of them and one day it'll be worth $100,000. That's never going to happen. So why not? If you want to play around with lowering it, just have a pro do it. Just don't, guess with stuff. Take it to a pro who sets up race cars and who does that stuff all the time. And they'll know which kits to put in, how to set the front up with the rear, and how to align it correctly. Because it'll ride like crap when you lower it, but it'll handle a lot better. If you want better handling, go right ahead and do it. Next question. Situation Money says, at what mileage should an in-tank fuel pump be replaced? Well, that's a very good question. There is no actual mileage. Take my 94 Celica. It's got 240,000 miles, and it's still got the original fuel pump, and it works fine. You got a good car with a good pump that can last indefinitely. That has a nip and denso pump. It's Japanese. And realize an in-tank fuel pump, if made correctly, the fuel actually cools the pump. Now see, the old pumps, they used to be outside on the bottom. The weather got to them and they get hotter because they're outside and they were near the exhaust and stuff. That pump is hidden in the gas tank. The gasoline is relatively cool. And with it running through, lubricating the bearings, sometimes those things can last forever. Now, that said, let's say you got a GM vehicle with an in-tank fuel pump. Heck, if I had more than 120,000 miles, I'd change the pump because they're garbage pumps and they break down all the time. And then you're going to be stranded in the middle of nowhere. So on one of those, you'd wait until you're almost out of gas, then you drop the tank and replace the pump. Because invariably, with my customers, with GM, the fuel pump almost always breaks right after they fill it up with fuel. Then they have a gigantic tank full of fuel, which is almost impossible to take down and take the pump out because it weighs so much. So if you want to do any preventative maintenance with a GM product, wait until you're almost out of gas, and then you can easily drop the tank. It won't weigh anything. Take it apart and then put a new pump inside. Next question. Nate Dogg says, Scotty, I'm a big fan of my own question is this. I have a 95 Mitsubishi Eclipse GSX with 130,000 miles. I have gasoline getting to the oil. What could be my issue? Okay, when you get gas in your oil, it's normally that you're getting some gasoline going past the piston rings, getting into the engine oil. Now, if it runs poorly, then I would say you want to have a mechanic check the fuel injectors. It could be that the seals are leaking and they're dripping too much gas in, or the MAF sensor is wrong and it's giving too much fuel, and so some of it gets by the piston rings. But I know Mitsubishis, and a lot of times it's just the piston rings wearing out because they have cheap piston rings in Mitsubishis. So what you want to do is have a mechanic, or if you've got a set of tools yourself, do a wet and dry compression test of the engine. Take out all the spark plugs, do a compression test, then put half a tablespoon of oil in each cylinder and do the wet compression test next. And if you find the compression pressure goes way up, it means your piston rings are worn. You have to rebuild the engine. I see that a lot in the Mitsubishi. They have weak piston rings. And when they're older like that, a lot of times, that's just what happens. If that's the case, just add oil as it burns it and live with it, unless you want to rebuild the engine, which is more than a car's worth. Next question. KC Rogers says, Scotty, what can happen if you don't change the oil filter for years? Will the engine deteriorate eventually? Thanks. Well, yes, it will. It filters the dirt out, and eventually it will stop filtering the crud out. And then if it really gets bad, it could plug all up and you'd lose a lot of oil pressure and the engine could blow up. Oil filters cost practically nothing. So every time you change the oil filter. I remember when I was a kid, guy we went to high school with bought a used MG English sports car from some girl who'd never changed the oil in 80,000 miles. And when he finally took it apart, the oil filter came apart like wet cornflakes. And the engine was all worn out inside, burned a ton of oil, just because they didn't change the oil and filter. You know, filters are cheap, change them. You don't want them to get clogged up, and you don't want them to eventually maybe completely deteriorate, and then the pieces start getting inside all the little holes and clogging everything up. Oil filters are cheap, engines are expensive. Just change the filters every time you change the oil, every 5,000 miles or so. Next question. Ruben Tatum says, hey, Scotty, do I need to rebuild the whole rear end if I just want to change the gear ratio? Well, you might as well, because you got to take it all apart and put different ratio gears in. And if you're going to do that, you might as well change all the bearings that are in there too. It would be stupid to not do that if you're going to go through all the trouble of taking it apart and putting different gears in to change your gear ratio. Let's face it, you know, it's like, I remember years ago, guys would come in and they'd say, oh, well, I need a valve job in my engine, but I just want to do a valve job. And I'd say, I wouldn't do it. And I said, what do you mean? you can't just do a valve job on the head of the engine because the old piston rings are worn, the bearings inside the crank are worn, and if you make the head really strong but the bottom isn't, then odds are it's going to wear out the bottom end even faster. So it's the same thing with the rear end. If you're changing the gears, change the bearings too. It would be foolhardy to do a big job like that and not do it correctly and put all new bearings into it. Would just be foolhardy. Next question. Georgie Max says, when a car loses oil and you don't see blue smoke or oil spots on the ground, where's the oil going? Well, it's burning it. Simply, it's burning it. Because you take oil. When oil leaks, just a few drips will make, an 8-foot wide circle in your driveway eventually. So if it's leaking and you're losing oil, you're going to have drips all over the place. If you have like a quarter of oil, that'll be like a football size. You're going to see it. Now, a lot of times when they burn oil these days, modern cars are pretty efficient. You won't see the smoke come out of the back because it burns everything pretty cleanly. And the catalytic converter will get rid of the rest. But they'll always leave telltale marks on your spark plugs. So if you lose an oil, you don't see it dripping, and you don't see a lot of smoke coming out, pull out a couple spark plugs, and odds are you're going to see burnt carbon on the electrodes of the spark plug, and that's telling you that it's burning oil. And in that case, just change the spark plugs more often. If you don't want to springe for rebuilding an engine, which costs an awful lot of money these days, and hardly anybody knows how to rebuild modern engines anymore. Guys I've seen that said they knew how to do it. Sometimes I have a customer have one rebuilt an engine, and they'll say, yeah, the guy rebuilt my engine for $2,500. And then the next year they tow it to my house to say, what's wrong? Say, your engine's blown again because the guy didn't rebuild it right. So it's really not something that most people even know how to do anymore. Next question. Letty says, Scotty, what do you think about the 2018 to 19 Corolla versus the Honda Civic 2018 to 19? The Civic looks better, but it's dead good. Manual transmission, of course. Okay, well, hey, if you're talking about manual transmissions, in that case, I would get the Civic because it's a much faster car. It is a somewhat better looking car, and it really does handle better. Now, in terms of long life, odds are the Corolla is going to last a little bit longer. But a Honda Civic, especially a modern one with a standard transmission, they are really fun to drive around. They're good-looking cars. In that case, with the manual transmission, I would probably get the Honda Civic because they are zippy little cars. And if you really want to get that racing one, the R that they have, that is a screamer. Next question. Nick Woodfield says, hey, Scotty, do you recommend people finance their cars or pay cash? Hey, I paid cash for every car that I ever bought. And man, I tell you, I've gotten deals. In my entire life, my own personal cars that I drove, I spent $7,500. And that's 51 years of driving cars. I've spent $7,500 total for every car that I personally own. Now, that doesn't include my wife's cars because she likes fancier cars. But it's all I've spent. You can save so much money paying cash for cars because I don't care what anybody says. Oh, it's the same price, cash or credit. It's BS. If you get on the street and somebody really needs money, one of the few things that most people have that they can sell fast is their car. Now, selling a house, that could take a year or more to sell a house. But selling a car, you can sell it fast. It's about the only thing you can get some serious money for these days. So you can get a deal when you pay cash for a used car. Mark Mendonca says, well, what are your thoughts on book time pay? Okay, he's talking about labor rates. If a mechanic works in a car, a lot of times they look it up on a labor rate. It says that's a 4-hour job. They charge $100 an hour. They charge $400 labor. Well, I don't like that stuff because a lot of it is total nonsense. And if you're working like at a dealership, even the mechanics get screwed over on that deal. Because let's say the mechanic has a 4-hour job and he does it in 2 hours. he gets paid the full pay for the first 2 hours, but the second 2 hours, they only pay him a percentage of his pay. So even he gets screwed over the job. Even though if you bring your car to a dealer and they charge $120 an hour and they say it's 4 hours, they're going to charge you $480 labor, but the mechanic isn't seeing his full percentage. So I really think that that book pay is a lot of baloney. And it really leads for dishonesty, both for the mechanics that work at a dealer and for the person who's paying for the car. I don't really believe in that stuff. You just see what it takes to do something, give somebody an honest price. That's how I've been doing it my whole life. My grandfather was the same way. He never looked up book labor on stuff. He said, well, here's the job and here's what it costs. Next question. Robin Teo says, how are Proton and Perodua cars in Malaysia? Are they good? Well, I've never personally worked on one because they don't sell them in Texas, but I have friends all over the world, and I have friends in Malaysia, and they like those cars. They say that they're decent cars. They don't sell them over here, so I can't say. I'm sure they would never really be big sellers in the United States because they're kind of micro cars. But my son's married to a woman from Singapore, and when they go over there, almost all the cars they said are micro cars, and they sell decent over there. So, I mean, if you need a small car and you live in a really congested area where it costs a fortune for gasoline, they're probably pretty decent cars. But they're too small from what I've seen to really fly in the United States. Americans always like a little bit bigger cars. They don't really go for micro cars. Well, that's it for this week. Remember, every day of the week, I upload 2 videos to the Scotty Kilmer channel on YouTube. Subscribe so you never miss one, and ring the notification bell so you always get notified. And I'm here every Thursday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live answering your questions, and Saturday at 10 a.m. answering your questions on YouTube Live. So I'll catch you next time.